countries fought and won in about 4 years. We had to fight Germany and Japan at the same time. And here we've been in Afghanistan for 10 years. Nobody knows exactly who we're fighting and why and when it's going to end and who's going to surrender. And the enemy's supposed to be the Taliban, and now we're negotiating with the Taliban. It just goes on and on. And if we handled it in a proper manner, I think we would be much better off. Actually, there's a big difference between the military-type spending and defense spending. We have a lot of military spending, but I think we ignore defense. We spend all our money overseas, and sometimes we worry more about other people's borders and less about our borders, and we ought to be worried about it right here at home. In the last 5 years, been over 40,000 people, mostly Mexican citizens and soldiers and drug dealers, have been killed on our southern border. That's a significant event, but nobody really talks about it. I mean, they talk about why we have to be overseas and settling all these disputes, but it makes more sense to me to provide for a national defense here. That is an obligation of the federal government. It was taken away from the state, given to the federal government to provide a strong national defense. And that would be a major step. So I'm willing to cut $500 million out of overseas spending. And while doing that, I want to protect some of the programs that probably somewhere along the way were unwisely started because they're all bankrupt right now. But I'm not willing to start by cutting there. Some of the programs would be, health care for children, health care for the elderly, Social Security. They're really bankrupt right now. And the only way we can keep them going for a while till we work our way out of it is we have to cut somewhere else in order to take care of the people that have become very dependent, rather than saying, don't cut anything overseas, don't cut anything military, but what we have to do is cut nickels and dimes away from health care. I don't think that is necessary if we do the right thing. So even after cutting a lot of money from overseas, and my suggestion is cutting $500 billion from overseas spending, it can be done. Is also cut domestic spending too, of the spending that is not so crucial. And I think departments like the Department of Education, to tell you the truth, I think we can live without the Department of Education. Even cutting, I suggested we cut 5 departments, even that wouldn't be enough. You have to reorient the budget. Now, the way the budget works in Washington, there are automatic increases all the way out 10 years. There's no suggestion that there will ever be any cuts. So anytime they talk about a cut, they're talking about the increases that are going up over a 10-year period. Well, I want to change that mindset, and I want some real cuts. So on the domestic spending, I would take all the budgets, almost all of them, except these special categories, and take it back to 2006 baseline, which means that there would be significant cuts. But government wasn't, too small in 2006. It was still way too big. So people don't mind going back, but we could live that way. If you as an individual had to cut back, you'd have to cut your spending, you'd have to cut your borrowing, you'd have to pay down your debt. So governments should be made to act as if they're the same as individuals, rather than them assuming that they can keep taxing the people that they think still might have some money, or borrowing the money as long as somebody will loan it to us, or just printing the money. That is what's coming to an end. That's why I think this is so serious. But the spending part would be one thing. The liquidation of debt is important. You've got to get rid of that. You can't just dump that on the people, or you can't get economic growth again. And there really hasn't been much growth at all. But the basic idea is that we have to have a clear understanding what personal liberty is all about. Because it's the understanding of liberty and property that really creates the environment for jobs to be developed. And the purpose of our federal government was basically to protect liberty. Although we came together as colonies and we devised a system of national defense, we also had some other mandates like having a sound currency, backing the money by something like gold and silver. That was a mandate. We totally ignore that. And there was very, very limited authority given to the federal government. The rest was designated to be with the states and with the people. And that was very clear in the 9th and the 10th Amendment. Today, that's surely been ignored, and I'm convinced that we've got into this mess because we've had too many in Washington that became too political, and they thought they were in the business of redistributing wealth. Well, that worked for a while when we had some wealth. It's not working so well right now because the wealth isn't there. And this is why we have to change the economic environment to allow people to create jobs again. And when people hear me talk about these big cuts, they say, oh no, that'll devastate things and that'll make things worse. But after World War II, that's exactly what we did. Depression had gone on. The prosperity did not return during the war. You know, people argue that war ends depression. That's never the case. It's still a drain on the economy. But it ended. But at the end of the war, 10 million people came back from overseas. And we cut the budget by 60%. And we cut taxes by 30%. And we finally ended the depression because the responsibility was put back on the people. The money was taken away from the government, and the people were allowed to do it, and economic growth came back again. So changing this is important because it's a dead-end street if we continue to do this. But it does require thinking about the Federal Reserve. We ought to know more about the Federal Reserve. In the bailouts, they spent over $15 trillion, and it's off budget. Congress is not even allowed to know what they do. We try real hard to audit them, but they keep things secret. Over $7 trillion went to bailing out banks overseas, and they're preparing to do that once again. So we need to rein in the Federal Reserve. And the truth is, if you have a true free market and you understand the Constitution, you really don't need a Federal Reserve. You just need honesty and money. One thing that happens when governments get too big and they regulate and run the economy and they want to run the world, and they have this constant war fever going on all the time. One other thing is our personal liberties, and that is what's happening today. There's a lot of attack on our personal liberties. For instance, right after 9/11, which was a terrible, terrible, day in our history, but I don't know how they thought we would become safer by taking away your liberties. So we passed the PATRIOT Act. I don't even think we need the PATRIOT Act. I think we ought to repeal the PATRIOT Act.